I'm bringing you this vlog from the side of my camera because it's the only place there's decent color, because I am so pale that as soon as I move to the middle of the frame it completely wipes everything out and it's awful. Watch, I'll do it for you real quick. Look at that. I didn't touch anything. That was just from me moving. Right, so I'm going to live over here because I am technology challenged, and I'm sorry about that. But today we're going to do some story time, or at least some talk about some different cultures time. John is off doing his show, so it's just me today. Next week we'll be back together. But I'm just going to go through a couple real quick. I'm only doing 3 questions today because, story time is long. But the first one asks, so I know it's kind of coming out of nowhere, but I was wondering if you could talk about the white buffalo calf woman. Do you think she's Legend 12? And do you think the Lakota have enough Legend 12 gods that they could one day in the future qualify for a write-up? And then at the end they cheered for the Navajo. So, first of all, yes. White buffalo calf woman is indeed pretty awesome. I'm sorry, I made notes about this and then immediately lost them. Bear with me. So I thought I put them underneath the camera. Okay. So, white buffalo calf woman, or sometimes she's just called white buffalo woman, depends on who's doing the translating, is a major figure in Lakota mythology. She's pretty great. She does a lot of stuff. She's very much a culture teacher kind of figure. She teaches people how to make fires. She teaches people how to cook. She teaches people how to make sacred lodges. One of the big things she does is she invents the sacred pipe, which gives rise to the peace pipe kind of stereotype that we tend to think of for Native Americans, and teaches the people how to use it. She teaches them a bunch of their sacred ceremonies, sacred rituals, and so she's a really big figure for establishing the Lakota culture. And in the myth where she does that, she actually just appears kind of out of nowhere to some hunters who are having severe problems feeding their tribe, and she's like, "Hey, I'm a sacred lady and I'm here with stuff for you." And they do a cautionary tale at the beginning because of the 2 hunters. One of them is like, "That is obviously a sacred lady or a goddess. I'm not going there." And the other one is like, "No, she's super hot, dude. I'm totally going to hit on her." And things go poorly for the guy that hits on her. Depending on the version of the story, either he gets immediately struck by lightning and killed, or she wraps him in a cloud and the cloud dissolves him like acid and just leaves his bones behind. So obviously not to be fucked with. And then the white buffalo calf woman goes on to go home, give them all this culture establishing stuff, and then she also, at the end of that myth, causes there to become buffalo in the area for them to hunt. And so that becomes her big contribution, is that's why they have the herds of bison to hunt. And by the way, she's traditionally called white buffalo woman or white buffalo calf woman, but we're talking about bison because we're in North America, not actually buffalo, which are African. But that's okay, traditional labels sometimes. If you prefer to call her white bison woman, feel free, just but people are going to not always know what you are talking about. So one of the really neat things I actually really enjoy about her is that in her myth, several times it's stressed that she says she comes as the reputation from the Buffalo Nation. And this goes back to the idea that we talked about in posts a couple of weeks ago about how some cultures have kind of a master animal, in this case the bison, which is conceived of as a whole race that is comparable to humans. So it's kind of like they, instead of saying there's a magical race like fairies, they say, well, buffaloes are a completely different race. They're not just an animal. They're the same kind of level as humanity, just a different race of beings. And in this case, they say, so the bison, they have to make this kind of deal with the white buffalo woman in order to be able to interact with and hunt the bison for food. Because otherwise, the bison, being people themselves, are not going to put up with that shit. And so it's basically a sacred compact where she says, if you do these appropriate rituals and respectful sacred observances, then you are allowed to hunt and eat the buffalo. Versus if they did not do that, then they would just be kind of infringing upon and murdering these other people who are just people in a different sense. So it's a very cool myth for illustrating that difference in the way that cultures that think of master animals tend to think. And so to answer the rest of your question, I think white buffalo calf woman is definitely a good candidate for being a Legend 12 god. She'd be one of the ones I looked for when I was going to or doing a Lakota pantheon. There are definitely enough people to do a Lakota pantheon. That is definitely a possibility. As you know, there are 90 billion different cultures in North America, so we cannot be doing all of them all at once, all the time. But Lakota is definitely possible. I know of some people out there that have worked on Lakota some, so if any of you are out in the blog audience, please tell this person in comments about all your awesome stuff so that if they want to do some Lakota in their games, they can. And she's probably got, she's obviously got animal bison. She'd probably have Sky based on the myth of her incinerating the hunter or dissolving the hunter. She might also have either magic or health, based on her like teaching of all the sacred rituals to the people, and also because some of those rituals are the ones that would be used for healing and medicine, so she's associated with healing in that way. She definitely play her as I would definitely play her as Legend 12, and then the rest of her pantheon, case by case, but they're definitely a pantheon, and they definitely can be played with. So don't feel like you can't use them just because we haven't touched them yet. Sadly, we're working on the Inuit right now, but there is just so much of North America, we cannot be doing all of them at once. So, and we don't want to ignore the rest of the globe. Like Asia has gotten a lot of love recently, so hang in there. Do cool stuff with Native American peoples if you can. Go for it. Nobody can tell you no. Second question, still in North America. Somebody said, since the other options on the poll are getting it, can you tell us a little bit about Navajo myth and culture? I can. The first thing I'm going to tell you is that it's actually, Navajo is not their name for themselves. They call themselves the Dine, which means people. And Navajo is an outside word for them from a different people, and I have forgotten who it is that calls them the Navajo. But anyway, it's the word that white people picked up on to start calling them, and so white people call them this word that is not actually their name, which happens a lot with Native Americans. Actually, the same thing with the Inuit. The Inuit call themselves the Inuit, which means people, but the Europeans call them the Eskimo because that's actually a word used by the nearby Algonquins a little bit south, who called them the Eskimo because it was kind of a pejorative term that meant those who, roughly translates to those who eat raw flesh or those who eat raw meat. And it was kind of an insult, in fact, that they used. So they would refer to them insultingly as Eskimo, and then white people said that must be their name. And then, so don't call Inuit people Eskimos, the upshot of that story. It's not very flattering. And they have officially made requests to the governments of the places they live to say, hey, call us the Inuit, please. So, similar thing within the Navajo. We call them the Navajo usually when we're talking about them because when we say Dine, nobody knows what we mean. But if you want to be politically correct, and you probably should, especially if you're talking to people of that culture or of the beliefs associated with it, it's not Navajo. But anyway, they are just a really thriving religion. If you're going to look at southwestern United States, the Navajo, the Zuni, and the Hopi are the massive religions down there, and they do all borrow from each other a little bit because they're in this unique area between Mesoamerica right below and the Northern American pantheons above. They share a lot of common stuff with both. For example, Coyote is one of their major tricksters. I think we have a Coyote post coming up sometime next week, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But they have a major Coyote trickster figure, as do many of the other ones nearby, and then because of that, it's the Aztecs also have a Coyote figure, and it's a big subject of scholarly debate, who had the Coyote figure first, who shared it to who else. They're all different. They're different figures now, but did they originally come from the same root, that kind of thing. So they're very neat. They have a lot of very recognizable mythological figures. There's Grandmother Spider. If you guys haven't heard of her, Grandmother Spider is she's kind of the opposite of a Nazi. She can do trickstery stuff, but mostly she's a cosmic creator kind of a figure. She kind of weaves the universe into being, maintains it. She's old, she's wise, you shouldn't mess around with her because she's not going to put up with you messing around. And then there's also Changing Woman, who's one of the major active figures in the mythology. One of the first culture bringers, one of the first people that is usually called upon in ritual. She's associated with healing, and she's associated with the appropriate performance of religious and sacred stuff. And then, of course, Coyote is out there doing his coyote thing. The coyote of the Navajo tends to be one of the more trickstery of them. The different coyote deities have different levels of how much they're being tricksters and what their tricksterism means. The Navajo one is one of those classic figures where he's definitely a trickster. He causes a lot of trouble because he just is kind of up to shenanigans and he doesn't think before he does stuff. Often those things bite him in the ass because that's what happens to a lot of trickster figures. But he's not really usually malicious, just kind of selfish and short-sighted. And usually, a lot of the time, his tricks will actually illustrate an important point, or, by punishing him for whatever he did, it will then, tell the listener of the myth, hey, that's why we don't do that, So they are very fantastic. For one thing, I want to be using their actual names instead of saying Changing Woman and Grandmother Spider. I am not doing that because their names are bananas, and I want to make sure that I have learned properly how to pronounce them before I start saying them in a vlog. They're 95 syllables long with 85 different accent marks, and you know that it's serious business because I'm happy to say all the Aztec words in the universe, but I can't. say all of the Navajo words without getting messed up. So those names are definitely out there, though, so you should look them up. Maybe I'll try and post them below this vlog or something. But yeah, they are definitely really fantastic. They have a ton of stories. They have some very important creation myth cycles about where the first people came from, how they came to the lands that they live in now, what their relationship is with the natural world. And they're very, I mean, there's tons of stuff out there that you can go out and find on them. Like, they're one of the more, I don't want to say pop culture, because of course they are their own culture, but pop culture has noticed them more than a lot of other Native American cultures. And so you can find, especially for things that originated in the Southwest, you can find a lot of fiction based on them. You can find a lot of design and artwork based on them. They're very, very cool. They have a lot of really neat mythology. I would love to work on them someday soon. You know, I've been cheering for them along with everybody else when they're on the voting polls, because, you know, I put the voting polls up because otherwise I don't know what to do, because I'm paralyzed by too many things I want to do at once, and these guys are one of them. So hopefully someday soon. Still working on the far, far North America, but maybe someday we'll get to do the South North America. So look forward to those guys. And my last one today is just someone who said Guarani mythology. Can we get some of that in here? We can get some of that up in here. Guarani mythology is fucking insane. So I know you guys know this a little bit, because a while back we did a post on different jaguar gods, and there was a jaguar god of the Guarani in there, who is actually like a giant serpent lizard with like 90 jaguar heads, but maybe they're dogs. That basically sums up the level of craziness that is going on in this religion. And first of all, you need to understand that the Guarani is an umbrella term, a lot like the Inuit is. It is a like cultural group, but there are different cultures within the Guarani. Like, there are different peoples, what usually scholars call tribal units. And they all have their own individual names. There's like the Mapui and the Guarani, and like, you know, a bunch of peoples. And basically it's an umbrella term for a lot of cultures that are related and have related languages and beliefs within a certain area of the Amazon. Mostly South Paraguay, Brazil, down in that area. So the Guarani have mythology that is not always cohesive across all of the different peoples involved, but they have a lot of the same figures and a lot of the same cultural ideas going on. And one of those is that they are very big on dichotomy of good versus evil, which, you know, you don't always see as much. We tend to think of that as being a mostly Middle Eastern phenomenon. You get that with Zoroastrianism, and then later the monotheistic religions start doing that. But they're very big on good versus evil. Not just like light versus dark or chaos versus order, but good versus evil. And so you have the original creator god, and he is the force for good in the universe, and he's the most important guy. He creates the other benevolent gods. He creates the universe. He puts the landscape features in place. He puts the stars in the sky. He is just generally really helpful dude. And, you know, we enjoy him. His name is Tupua, with an A that is hard to pronounce, so I apologize for my pronunciation. And he's the major figure. He's one of those like higher up creation gods, though. Sorry, I moved too far on the camera. So he's like not very active once he's done his creation stuff. He kind of backs out. Apasi, the moon goddess, starts doing more stuff, and her children start doing more stuff. And fairly early in Guarani mythology narratives, they create humanity, and then it becomes tales of human culture heroes, and or at least demi-human culture heroes that do stuff and kind of set the world in order. But opposite him, we have Tao, and Tao is just the god of evil. That's his thing. He is badness personified, and his entire motive in life is to screw up everything that Tupa has created and basically make the world horrible. And that's what he likes to do. There's not a lot of explanation for that, because he's just evil personified, so that he doesn't need a motivation. He's just a bad guy. And he is all about, he creates the 7 monster gods. And the 7 monster gods, they have crazy ass names, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce right now. Similar thing. But they're kind of the gods of things that are negative but can have positive uses. They'll be gods of things like death, or like unfettered sexuality, or like wild animals. Like stuff that most of the time is pretty scary and bad for humanity, but that maybe needs to exist, kind of. And that makes them, for Scion, like this really weird place of, are these gods that are just gods of these scary things, because this is a religion that heavily depends on dichotomy, and so you need to have a god in charge of kind of the good and the bad aspects? Or are they titans as the like representatives of these scary concepts that frighten the world but that need to exist in some way? I have seen people make decisions both directions about whether they should be gods or titans. A lot of them have stories where they're overcome in the end of them, which looks a lot like the Binding of Titans, but some of them are still kind of at large, or some of them get bound and then become more benevolent because they can't like do bad stuff as much anymore. And some of that changes from people to people within the Guarani. So some of the Guarani might be like, oh yeah, that guy's on lockdown, and the others might be like, no, he's not, he's like rampaging. So that's a question I can't answer yet. Like if we were going to start doing a Guarani right up tomorrow, whether we would be like, okay, are the seven monsters gods? Are we going to stat them as gods? Can you be a scion of the seven-headed lizard jaguar dog thing? Or are they titans and you have to deal with, this is a culture that has like 10 million titans, and what do you do with that? Or is it maybe some of both? Like these were a bunch of children of this primordial titan. Some of them became titans and some of them became gods, and kind of how do those interact with each other, and how are the relationships between those brothers really present? And so I think that's very interesting. I don't know where that would go yet. Again, love to work on them someday, but only one thing at a time, right? And of course, South America could use some more love. The only people down there right now are the Apu, so we could use some more going on that continent, because right now it looks like there's a weird wasteland where nobody lives, and of course that's not true. I think there's a lot of low-level stuff that's really interesting with them. While they don't always have as many high-level like god narratives, they have a lot of interesting lower-level religious stuff. There's a lot of strict separation of the sexes, where there's stuff that only men are allowed to know and participate in, and only women are allowed to know and participate in, which is something that the Australian Aboriginal cultures do a lot too. And that you end up with this kind of like, to the point that women can like be executed for accidentally touching a religious object they weren't supposed to touch, but then like men can have the same thing happen to them, or like get exiled because they got involved in something that was for women only, and now that's not okay. They're also one of those cultures that has some like ancient stories about this is why women are subjugated by men, and kind of has some cultural explanations for why from a religious perspective they do that. I'm not going to go ahead and endorse it, but you know, ancient cultures all doing that stuff. Another really neat thing that they do is we often talk about there's the kind of interplay and syncretization between an ancient culture and then an incoming religion. Excuse me. And in this case, for the Guarani, it's mostly Christianity. Christian missionaries were the first ones to get to them and kind of really influence their culture. And so because their culture already did this heavy good-evil dichotomy, that actually played into it really well. Excuse me, I'm sorry. It's winter. So you get a lot of stuff where they talk about Christian ideas of, for example, heaven. Like previously in the Guarani religion, there had been a lot of stuff where like kind of if you did the appropriate things and you pleased the gods and you did your rituals right, you would be able to transcend things like poverty or danger, or injury or sickness, and your life would be better. And since the influx of Christianity, which says, well, you know, life on earth is different from life in heaven, a lot of the people who still follow those traditional beliefs have transitioned into saying, okay, well, if you do all that stuff, then when you die, you get safety from those things. Basically, they've moved that you get a reward for doing religious stuff to the afterlife instead of to now. But the same, like the concept has syncretized itself together. Also, it's obviously very easy to syncretize Tupa with God and Tao with the devil, and then say the gods, those are, you know, the primordial forces fighting across the universe. And so you get your normal stuff where you're like, how do we tell what was originally in this religion and what came from Christianity? And then there's also a really cool thing with, they have kind of a pilgrimage sort of thing going on. Not like the pre-Islamic Arabs did, because it's not like an annual pilgrimage, but it's an idea that there's the land without suffering. That's the place that the gods live. That's the place that is slowly becoming syncretized with Christianity's heaven. And in previous times, it was believed you could get to the land without sorrow if you did the appropriate things and you happened to make a pilgrimage and make a long journey through the wilderness. You could maybe eventually get there. And so, despite the fact that a lot of that idea has moved to the afterlife, the Guarani people continue to occasionally make kind of sporadic en masse pilgrimages to try to get to the land without evil. With like as recently as like the 1940s, it's there are records of like Guarani people saying, okay, they just like picked up and moved, like walked 200 miles toward the ocean and then settled there because they were just like, we're gonna get closer to the land where things don't suck. And so that's a really neat thing that's going on, and I think a really right place in Scion to play with ideas of terra incognita and where humans can cross the line between the divine and the normal and everyday, and whether or not that's something they can actually do, why they believe that, whether the gods are involved in that, all kinds of stuff like that. So the Guarani are not the only people we got going on in the Amazon. There are different culture groups with their own religions, but they are one of the most widespread and largest, which is why they're kind of the best choice for Scion. And also, because they're widespread and large, there's more people with a larger pantheon of beings versus a lot of the Amazonian peoples have, like, they're very small because they live in a very small area, have a fairly small group of people, and so they only have like a couple of gods, so it's hard to build a pantheon out of that. Especially since different isolated peoples among the Amazon don't really interact with each other, or at least didn't until fairly recently in history, and so you can't really just slap all their gods together and call them an Amazon pantheon because they don't really have anything to do with each other. But the Guarani, I think you can definitely make a really great pantheon for use in Scion, or at least some great figures and cultural ideas for use in Scion. And I know I'm not the only person who's really excited about them. If Griffin Guy is around, I know he's been working on Amazon stuff, and especially the Guarani, for like ever. So if you ever want to talk shop about them, look him up. Yeah, I think basically talking about these three pantheons has made me super excited, and I want to work on them immediately, which of course isn't fair. I'm working on the Inuit right now, and there's a poll up for a reason, so you guys get to vote on the next stuff, so I don't just like rant hair off and do whatever it is that I got excited about today. But very cool stuff. I intentionally did all the ones in the Americas today because I was like, the Americas need some love, and they don't get as much attention in Scion as they should. For some reason, they just get left in the dust behind the Europeans, and that's not fair because there are a lot of them, and they are super neat. And they're very different from a lot of European ideals, but that's really just gives the world of Scion more variety and more cool stuff going on instead of just the same tropes that you get over and over again in Europe. So, very excited. That's going to be your story time for today. I guess I didn't really tell as many stories. In fact, I don't think I told many stories at all. I mostly just talked about cultures, but I was really excited about it. I hope you're excited too. So if you are into doing some Native American stuff, you can vote for them up on the, wait, that direction? Yeah, over here. There we go. I can figure out cameras. There's polls right over here where you can vote if you want to vote Native American, or if you don't, that's fine too. They're not everybody's cup of tea, and that's cool. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I'm going to see you guys again later next week when it will be John and me. And we will have a video camera where I can do this without it turning into a ghost show. So goodbye, everybody. See you next time.